I gave up painting around 1965, I think, and the reason for giving up painting was that I realized that I could probably do with photographs what I needed to do without resorting to painting. I think the first time I used photography in my work was pretty much as documentation of something. I had done a work where I had used a map of the state of California and a word California going down the length of the state. I would go drive to that spot where each letter was on the map. The C would be in Northern California and proceeding south to like the last letter would be A, that'd be somewhere, let's say, in San Diego near the Mexican border. Whatever materials I saw there, it might be rocks, it might be newspaper, I would make that letter in that location and photograph it. The next works, I, using a liquid photographic emulsion on canvas, made the photograph on the canvas so you could treat the canvas like photographic enlarging paper. And the reason I did it on canvas was that I wanted to make it very clear that it was art. If one sees canvas and stretcher bars, automatically you know it's art. I devised all kinds of ways, which started early back in these National City work. I took photographs of just driving around the city in which I lived in the south of California in a little city called National City, and I just had my camera outside of the car, not even looking through it, and taking what we call snapshots. And then I would note down the location, and the finished work would have the photograph, and a sign painter would write down the location that I had put on it. And I got that idea of just looking through books, documentary photography of some city and saying, well, this is, looking south on this street and this is the city, or looking east here and this is what you see. It's just very clinical, not aesthetic. So I wanted these things to simply to have none of the qualities of conventional art, of beauty, just saying, well, it's pure document. I wanted to be kind of a realist, almost, let's say, like Courbet, saying, well, listen, this is where I live, and I'm not trying to make it pretty. A photograph, at least a black and white photograph, is nothing but oxidized silver on paper. And a painting, if we stay with black and white, again, is this carbon with an emulsification that goes on the canvas. Now, what's the difference? It's just different materials. I don't care about what f-stop it is or what the grain of the film or how does the color look natural, all of these things, or do I have enough grays in a black area or do I have enough white? I really don't care. I mean, it's the imagery that interests me. I had very much been interested all along in using what we would call found photography, let's say, and I think now we call it appropriation. My idea is that I'm an artist using photographs, and now that's a fairly conventional idea, but at the time it wasn't. And I had this idea that if an image already exists, then there's no reason to make a new one. I might photograph things out of dictionaries or anything, any source. I would go to photographic processing companies and go through their garbage bins to look for photographs that they would throw away and use those kinds of things. Or I would set up a camera outside my studio on a timing mechanism, so every 10 minutes they would take a photograph, and then I would use that material. And then I began to do the same thing off of television. For instance, images off of the television. Then I would give them to my assistant and say, write on the back of it what you think this is, this one word. And then I would file them away like in a dictionary. And then I would use them as like language, except instead of using the word, I would use the image. I've always been interested probably in writing more than art history. And I see myself maybe as almost like a visual poet, and that sounds very romantic. But when I say poet, it's like a writer that uses words very precisely, the best possible choice of a word, poet in that sense. And where I'm trying to create meanings that I might not get if I actually did use words. But I always like to think that behind each image that I use, there is a word. Then I began to use movie stills and I began to collect them, to file them in different categories. And the most noticeable one would be people with guns. And very seldom would I use the complete image. Sometimes of an 8 by 10, I might use maybe just 1 square inch. When I find a still, I indicate it with a red crayon how I want it cropped. And then, since I've been, working rather large scale, they're copied on an 8 by 10 copy camera, so I get a very large negative. They're individual prints made on adhered to board, mezzanine board, and then they're simply stacked one atop another and put in a frame. I think why I use movies and TV is that's probably a more real world to most people than the real world. It's more familiar. Then I got to a point where I had these photographs not from the movies, but mixed in movie stills of photographs from the newspaper, not from international news, but usually local news, like the mayor, the police chief, what have you, shaking hands with a dignitary. And I always hated those photographs. And I guess that's what the photographer says now, shake hands and smile. And I had these little round stickers that you use in stores and prices. I began to put them on top of the face. Then once I had these figures with their faces obliterated, I could begin to use them like players or actors in a stage play or a movie. Well, in this particular peace agreement, there was a kind of symmetry about it. There's somebody looking frontal. There's a person on either side, almost like bookends, holding this intersection out. I get the handshake aligned with the head here, and that I'm getting pairs of colors like red and green that are opposites, triads, red, yellow, blue. In the history of art, especially contemporary art, that's a fundamental color sequence. One of the things that I discovered when I moved from painting to photography was that photographers had to deal with given formats, 8 by 10, 11 by 14, and the viewfinders in the cameras are, adjusted to that, or vice versa. So recently that's kind of come back into my work, and I'm exploring panoramic cameras where you get a very long format. But again, I have this perverse streak in me, so where they're basically made to do landscapes, I would just turn it so it was used vertically, so I could escape this conventional kind of height-width relationship. Since I gave up painting, I've always collided things, 2 images, 3 images, like a writer would bring 2 words together, and if you get the 2 right words, then you have some magic that happens. Usually, I'm looking for images that is unsettling, that it deals with the unpredictability of life. I like the vulnerability and the chanciness of life, but like to present the idea of stability and instability in the same context. Things happen that we don't like to happen, that the world isn't a calm place. I like to think that the world could open up under my feet any moment. It just, for the moment, it's not doing that.